What's the best example of MacGyvering that you've ever seen? I went to the gym one time and locked myself out of my car. The keys were on my seat. Window was cracked by like 1/8. I tried looking for a stick to see if I could pick up the keys. New strip mall, young trees, no branches anywhere around. Frick. I thought maybe I could force the window down with my fingertips. I tried and tried, but the window only moved slightly. I was afraid I would break the mechanism, so I didn't force it any further. Then it clicked. I took off my shoe, took off the shoelace, made a loopy made up knot and slid it through the crack on the window. Thankfully that old car still had manual windows, so I caught it and slowly turned it. The window lowered an inch or so. Then I unhooked the shoelace and took it out. The space was still too narrow for my arm. I kept thinking about what to do. Then a second blast of ingenuity came in. I tied my padlock to the shoelace and got it through the crack. I started hitting the handle and it kept going down bit by bit. I repeated that process a couple times and finally slid my arm in, unlocked the door, took my keys, got into the driver's seat and just laughed and laughed. I'm pretty sure that if your car still has manual windows, you really don't need to ever lock it. At an antique car parade, and what I think was a Ford Model T was leading the show. All of a sudden the car stops, and so does the entire parade. Without hesitation, the driver jumps out, pops the hood and starts unbuckling his pants. He then pulls out a broken belt from under the hood, and used the belt he was wearing as a replacement. The parade started right back up like nothing happened. Not the first time that happened, I'm guessing. We had an industrial filter that was super leaky, and expensive chemicals were splashing all over the place, so they chopped up a bunch of old plastic boxes and made a bunch of ducts to catch the chemical. They then had it all drained to a container and pumped it back to the process. What makes it funny is that they choose to do all this work rather than just buy a couple of new seals and gaskets. Cheaper. I live north of the Arctic Circle and I'm not trained in sleeping in heat. A couple of years ago we had the hottest summer ever, and it was painful. So I made a tunnel of cardboard about 2 meters long. Inside I made space to have 4-liter bottles filled with ice with an open space between them. I mounted a fan at one end and pointed the other towards the bed. It worked like a charm. Every morning I put the bottles in the freezer and put them back in the cardboard tunnel in the evening. Wife and I slept like kids. I was locked out of my house, but was able to get the rolling garage door open. The actual door to the house was locked though, so naturally I popped the pins out of the hinges and attempted to remove the door. It was jammed far too tight however, and wouldn't budge. After searching the garage a bit, I found a can of compressed air which I inverted and sprayed on all of the hinges. The extreme cold shrank all the metal, and I was able to pop the door right off. I think you are MacGyver. I dropped the only set of car keys we had behind a set of concrete stairs. Before I even had a chance to react, my boyfriend had smashed a shaker flashlight and was tying his bootlace to the magnet that's in there. He got the keys out in under a minute. I didn't even know shaker flashlights had a magnet. Changing magnetic fields induce current. On a road trip in a really old van, we intended to use an FM adapter to listen to music, but the radio wasn't working. It wasn't working until someone jammed a pen attached to a paper clip into the cassette deck. Don't remember why someone tried that, but it totally worked. Worked as a makeshift antenna. My buddy couldn't afford to put a fence around his house to keep his dog in, but he had a friend that worked in shipping with access to pallets. His house is surrounded by a pallet fence now. It looks better than you'd imagine. I mean, not like good or professional, but better than you'd imagine. I can see it work. Don't get me wrong. Great privacy too. The best example of MacGyvering I have ever seen was some of the early IEDs, improvised explosive devices, that the insurgents used during the first part of the Second Gulf War. I saw bobs that were put together with just everyday common stuff you could find on the roadside. We used to call the insurgents redneck MacGyvers. I saw an IED museum once. There were some very strange devices. I saw one that was made from a glass jar. One of my roommates wanted to take a bath, but no stopper for the tub. So my other roomie created a stopper out of a shot glass and a rubber glove. Worked like a boss. Lid from a prescription pill bottle works too. The child-proof ones. That's what I use. guy I bought a car from had the entire radiator held in place only using bag ties. It was brilliant and we didn't even notice it until we got home and the bag ties came out and the radiator blew. I was on a deployment once where 2 of our engines were fricked and one of the spares had a condensation problem or something. I was not an engineer but I had to learn about the basics of what they do in order to get a qualification. While tutoring me and giving me a tour, we walked by a monster with hair dryers taped onto it to dry it out. I was on an all-male ship save 4 female officers. I don't know where they got the hair dryers from but that engine lasted the rest of the deployment. Freaking heck, I've done that in Mexico for my work, more than likely the same setup as well. You suckers come up with some of the strangest hacks of all time. Has to be my grandfather. He decided to build a house after World War II. He was also an airplane mechanic out of a nearby military base. What the one has to do with the other is after the war they had literally tons of the crates they'd put vehicles in to drop them out of airplanes lying around. They were surplus. The military didn't want them, so he repurposed them. Turns out each of the sides of the crate were exactly the right height for walls, so that is exactly what he did. Then he slapped clapboard to the outside and plastered the inside and you just couldn't tell. Wouldn't pass code today, I'm sure, but they were plenty strong enough to hold the house up, and did so for the better part of 70 years. Ingenious, really. Pretty much every bit of lumber in that house came from those crates. For free, and he did all the work building it, digging out the basement, by hand, with help from kin, the wiring and plumbing. He did have to hire someone for the plaster, though. Gypsum board was available by then, but my grandmother insisted on the old style. They quite literally don't make people like him anymore. He'd work 40 hours a week at the base fixing planes, go directly to the house site and work until he ran out of light, work all weekend, and just did so for years until he got that house built. He sounds pretty awesome. Once, the arms of my desk chair started wearing down, so I covered them with a new finish of duct tape. Then, a wheel came loose, so I reattached it with duct tape. Then, a wheel leg had some problems, so I covered that with duct tape. Then, the loose wheel fell out, so I duct taped the whole thing and put it back on. Half the dang chair was duct taped by the end of it. It's the chair of Theseus. A friend of mine didn't have any toilet paper left. He called his roommate, asking him to bring some tortillas. Well, if it's stupid but it works, it's not stupid. And thus Taco Bell was born. In Afghanistan we taped a knife to our robot's arm to cut the string attached to the 10k line charge that we drug out using our docking robot. We had robot races with a knife wielding robot and a robot carrying 10k in C4. In Afghanistan, under heavy contract. Sappers. Please tell me there's video evidence of this. Funny off-topic MacGyver story. In the 6th grade I watched that show every day. In one episode he describes how to hotwire a car. The next day at school we had to write a how-to guide on any topic. Eureka! I'll write about how to hotwire a car since I just learned myself. Needless to say that paper got me a parent-teacher conference. First, you take a paperclip and a stick of chewing gum. So I was working for this large disaster relief non-for-profit. At the time, the tablets we used were locked by latch and padlock in a cabinet. I came to work one day to find the supervisors in panic. Apparently, someone managed to somehow get the notch on the padlock arm caught in the hole of the male part of the latch while arm was closed. I know it's hard to visualize, but basically the latch was closed and the lock arm notch was stuck in the space in such a way it could not be pulled out of the latch and the cabinet was shut. No equipment could be retrieved effectively, moving everyone to paper until a bolt cutter could be fetched. Well, I asked for some ice and a lighter. I put the ice on the arm of the lock, then heated up the latch. Out it slipped. They looked at me like a sorcerer. My coolest and nerdiest use of science ever. What does that do? My clutch pedal fell from an old Ford junker I was driving around a long time ago. The cotter pin wound up shearing after all its years of use. I guided the truck into a parking lot of a Boston market, then started searching for something to fix it. All I was able to find was a 2-inch long piece of speaker wire scrap in my glove box. Pushed it through the hole, twisted it around and was back to driving. I drove the truck 2 more years before finally selling. To my knowledge that piece of speaker wire is still holding that clutch pedal together. Maybe not the most crazy example, but it's my proudest MacGyver moment. That's cool and all, but I hope you told the person you sold it to about their RCA clutch assembly. My dad had an old delivery cube van which he insisted on repairing himself. What he lacked in skill he made up for with ingenuity and determination not to spend any dollar sign. A large screwdriver was permanently jammed into the ignition in place of having to use a key. And to solve the issue of the door lock not releasing when pressed, he drilled at least a dozen holes in the door panel until he found the latch. He then drew an arrow towards the correct hole so that you knew where to jam the Bic pen to release the lock. Your dad sounds like he may not have paid for that car. Wasn't a friend but me actually. Got locked out of all my belongings. I lost a key for my hostel locker while out drinking in Australia, and woke up in the morning with nothing out of said locker but a pair of my underwear, a shaving blade, and my room key. I ended up going to reception in my underwear to get the fork. I proceeded to use one of the 4 prongs as a tension rod as I used the, now dismantled, razor as a pick. Only took me 5 minutes to pick the lock. Never in my life have I been so happy about learning a useless skill. I can still remember the look on the French girl's face in my room when she saw me in my freaking underwear trying to pick a lock. Embarrassing moment, but I still felt like a badass after I got it open. French girl's face in my room when she saw me in my freaking underwear. Maintain eye contact and do it naked. I watched a friend Ray attach his suspension to his 4x4 truck in the middle of nowhere on a 4x4 only road using only mule tape. The bolt holding the top end of the shock had come out and we had nothing to replace it, nor was towing his truck out an option. It drove like that for at least 500 miles before he was able to replace the bolt when he got home. I don't know what mule tape is, but if it's intended for taping mules to things, it must be pretty strong. Driving down a shallow creek with a friend way out in the middle of nowhere in my 76 CJ7 when the oil pressure gauge drops to nil. Popping the hood reveals that the line has dry rotted and snapped, spraying oil everywhere and generally freaking me the frick out. We were literally miles from civilization and the woods before the golden age of cell phones. Holy crap. Dude, we're fricked. He calmly reaches into his pocket, pulls out a lighter, and melts the line, sealing it. We drove out of there like champs. Son oil pressure gauge. Mac frickin' gibbered. Using a lighter on an oil line with oil all over the place. When I was little I used to have a neighbor that kept balls that went over the fence. My friends lost many balls and gave up trying to convince him to give them back. Once he took the only ball I've kicked over the fence. Oh, its personal mother. I waited for him to leave his house. Glad he was lonely. I hopped the fence only to find out he kept them inside. My clever mind grabbed the nearest stick and pried the glass pane off the frame and carefully placed it on the grass. I retrieved my ball. Frick the others. Got out. Placed the pane back and went on my way. In my head, he later came home, opened that sliding glass door window, and the pane just fell off and shattered. The look of confusion on his face. Some Louisiana thunderkind used a lighter and Axe body spray to light a bonfire. A ghetto flamethrower. He has since evolved into the Redditor typing this. That s'more was pretty delicious though. It tasted like flamin' insecurity. Maybe not the most out there, but I was proud of this one. I was changing the oil in a new Escape. I got the car up, pulled the drain plug, and drained all of the oil. It was at this point I realized I didn't have an air filter wrench or a funnel. Luckily what I did have was printer paper and a belt. I took off my belt and wrapped it around the oil filter, and used that to loosen the filter. Once I swapped out the filter and was ready to pour in the new oil, I just took some paper and tape, rolled a handful of sheets into a cone, and used that to top her back up. When I bought a new belt a bit later for unrelated reasons, I took the old one and tossed it in my car for future use. I've definitely removed oil filters using channel locks before when I didn't have a strap wrench or when my filter wrenches weren't the right size. Gotta use what you have. We were all high on acid and were coming back from a hot springs in Whitehorse when the car stopped suddenly. Popped the hood and the driver took the distributor cap off and the plate was cracked in half. I turned away to have a smoke, and when I looked back the driver had his nylon comb out and had set it on fire. I moved in for a closer look and the hot nylon from the comb was dripping onto the cracked plate and gluing the broken part back together. He hopped into the car and fired it up. We drove the 20k back into town. This is insanely cool, and I don't think it needs to be pointed out, but to anyone reading this, do not drive on acid. The street lights constantly make everything look like you've engaged warp drive. My father-in-law used a car's wheel, like for the tire not steering wheel, as a base to put his Christmas tree in one year. It was awesome. In high school, my friends and I used to hold competitions to see who could make bongs the fastest, solely out of things found in my dad's garage. There were some marvels of engineering. A few years ago I saw someone make a bong out of an apple. I lack the handicraft skill to even attempt to recreate the featuring. An uncle of mine was driving his 4WD in the woods when he hit a rock, knocking a hole in his transmission pan and quickly draining all of the fluid. With a disabled vehicle miles back in the woods, he took stock of his available resources. He located the hole in the pan, then found a stick of proper diameter. He inserted the stick into the hole, then broke it off, effectively plugging the leak. He didn't have any transmission fluid with him. However, he did have some mercury outboard oil which he poured down the transmission dipstick. This worked well enough to allow him to get out of the woods and to the closest store to buy proper transmission fluid to get home on. I wasn't an eyewitness, but he told this story for years. I got stuck in my closet once because the doorknob fell off. I took apart the Lego toy and built a sort of key that would fit in the hole and give me the torque to open it. Another time the wire that controls the accelerator in my dad's old car fell off. We pulled into this really shoddy parking lot, and I found a bit of fence wire. He bent it and we were able to go home, just very slowly. Hills were hard. My dad got a hot tub for free, but it had no heater. To get it running, he'd have to buy a heater and run 220V wiring, as well as constantly running the heater, which was well out of his budget. He grabbed an old radiator, hooked up hosing and the water pump to it, then placed it in the BBQ. When he wanted to use the hot tub, he started up the BBQ, waited a half hour, then hopped in the tub. I needed to cool down my aquarium water because my AC broke during summer and you can't just pour cold water in there. Too sudden temperature change can hurt your fish. I unhooked the fans from my laptop cooler pad and wired them to a USB power cord. Plugged the USB cord into an Apple charger into the wall. Hooked the fans up onto a pane of glass with rubber bands, which I propped up above my fish tank, and directed the fans onto the water surface diagonally. Turned on fans. Water slowly cooled down by 10 degrees. My fish were happy. AC got fixed the next day. We went camping with Boy Scouts in the mountains, miles from cell phone access or anyone else. One of the kids locked the keys in the Scoutmaster's wife's brand new truck. The Scoutmaster rummaged through the bed of the truck where most of the gear was stowed and took out the homemade steel cooking stove thing with attached propane tanks, 3 feet x 4 feet, and proceeded to jimmy the lock with the edge of the stove. It took him less than 5 minutes. He scratched his wife's truck a bit in the process, and we were sworn to secrecy. Some automotive MacGyvering. Middle of nowhere Napa didn't have a belt I needed for my car. He suggested pantyhose from the Walmart and it worked. Ran out of gas and I pee in the tank. It worked and got me to the closest gas station because the volume of gas increased enough to make it to the fuel pickup, but the pee didn't dilute it so much as to make it non-combustible. Jump started a truck by touching the metal bumper to another metal bumper, then touched the 2 positive posts of the batteries with 2 expanded coat hangers. Won't work on modern cars with plastic bumper covers. I was a marine engineering technician in the Canadian Navy. I've used a placemat to make a gasket, used a juice can to repair a high pressure 900C valve, made springs from mild steel to get a compressor running again, annealed Cooper gaskets to reuse them, repaired a gas turbine while it was running, invented new procedures to remotely operate valves while doing a tactical fueling at sea, under the cover of night, with a very tight timeline, invented procedures to equalize boiler temperatures on the fly, thus reducing the time to go from one operational boiler to both operating from 30 minutes to 15 in order to get the ship back to full power. Created tighter calibration tolerances and techniques that doubled the rated output of our evaporators, water makers, pulled parts from one valve to repair an unrelated valve in order to get our main engine oil temperature control working, machined parts to repair various components, These are just highlights that stick out after being out of the trade for 6 years. MacGyvering things was a daily way of life. I get the feeling that all engineers do is MacGyver crap all day long. I was 3 hours from home in a post truck. Something shorted out in the electrical system and I ended up with no tail lights at 3 AM. This was before cell phones and I was on the interstate in the middle of nowhere. I wanted to get home before morning because I had to work at 7 AM. Long story short, I adjusted the brake light switch so the brake lights were on all of the time. I now had lights on the back of my truck and I made it safely home. My dad. He was an electrical engineer and all his appliances were from the mid-70s, but rewired, with new additional buttons and switches and worked like new until my sister finally managed to convince him to buy new things. While on patrol at night in Iraq, my squad leader helped fix my night vision in a pretty cool way. There was not much ambient light so it was very hard to see. I thought it could just be the batteries. So I pop open the battery compartment and the metal brackets sit on end fly off never to be seen again. Now I'm doubly fricked. Except without missing a beat my squad leader takes the folly insert out of his cigarette pack, folds it up, and places it in the battery compartment. Just like that my NVGs were up and running. Maybe common sense to some but I never would have thought of it at the time. If you want to play a game, and you need AA batteries but don't have any, use AAA batteries and some foil. Once had a buddy pop his bike tube and tire doing a show off. He could stop on his brakeless fixed gear. After the group finished laughing at him, one of the fellas patched it up with a thick piece of cardboard and a snack bar wrapper so he could ride the 3 or 4 miles home. On a bus from Dalat to Saigon, the transaxle broke, and the driver bodged something together out of materials in the bus so that he could make it to a rest stop, where he then went under the bus with a borrowed welding rig and created a solution that got us all the way to Saigon. Driving to Canada with brother. First gas stop engine is revving on a 99 Nissan Altima while it's in park. The gas cable bracket thingy, IDK what it is dislodged and stuck on gas. Well my brother, now a mechanical engineer, takes 2 tight wrap, zip tie, and fastens the bracket into its original slot. We didn't even remember about it until 2 months later when he was selling it. Car traveled maybe 6k miles that trip. My personal best was fixing a friend's laptop in the middle of a restaurant with a toothpick piece and foil off my tortillas. My muscles were killing me and all I needed was to soak for an hour in the bathtub. The thing is, I only take showers and hadn't soaked in years, so the rubber stopper thing had shrunk and wasn't keeping the water inside the bathtub anymore. So I drenched a wad of cotton wool and baby oil, wrapped it around the stopper and voila, worked like a charm. Best heard of was an old Range Rover with the clutch mechanism broken so it was driven with one person on the bonnet with a hook disengaging it manually when the driver wanted to change gears. I feel like timing this correctly would be really difficult. My brother once wrapped a huge amount of rubber water hose around a bare rim in order to drive it 5 miles down the road since he lacked a spare tire and the money for a tow truck. It almost worked. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.